So Mod Blossom hosted RuneScape's first Discord stages, and it was a lore Q&A in which she had Mod Ed, who is a senior narrative designer at jagex, and Mod Errol, who is a content writer. I watched that, and I cut this down to some of the parts that I found the most interesting. Before we go any further, of course, spoiler warning for pretty much like all content in the game. So, off rip, Blossom asked some of the mods about their inspiration when building lore for RuneScape. I thought Mod Ed's response was actually pretty interesting.
The old Resident Evil games have always been a big one. That gameplay has always felt very akin to like old school, I guess, sort of similar era, and then more recent games like a lot of the From Software games they've always to me felt very similar to RuneScape as well, in that a game that is maybe somewhat challenging, somewhat difficult for new people to get into. Especially on the narrative side, some of the narrative isn't overly obvious, but then once you start digging deeper, there's a lot to discover and enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just sat here grinning as soon as you mentioned Resident Evil. I'm like, yes. I love Resident Evil. No, that's awesome.
So I've never played any of the Resident Evil games, but if you're a fan of Resident Evil, maybe that means something to you. I definitely might check them out now because that sounds interesting. Next up, and this is a theme throughout the whole video, they start to discuss backporting old quests from RuneScape 3 into old school.
There was a survey we did a couple of years back about backporting, and basically the conversation from that sort of came about, like, we basically discovered that it was possible, we could backport, and we wanted to see what people would think of that idea. And most of them we found like they weren't really suitable for old school. And that's not necessarily like to discredit those quests, but just they didn't fit with the style of old school storytelling. They didn't fit with like some of the things we wanted to do with those stories. But we sort of made a short list of quests that could be appropriate, and we sort of did this survey, asked people what they thought, and then from that we made a decision on selecting some from that survey that we'd move forward with backporting. And obviously we've done a few of those now. RuneScape and Old School, obviously very different games now. There's a reason Old School exists, and that isn't just things like MTX and EOC and all the other fun ones that people like to debate about. It does stretch to other things as well, like narrative. There is narrative in RuneScape that doesn't match up with what the narrative direction for Old School is. The obvious ones being the return of the gods. The gods are never, ever, ever going to come back in Old School. That is not a thing that will ever happen. Player being the World Guardian, never, ever, ever going to happen in Old School either. Obviously, by extension of that, spoilers, Guthix obviously won't die. He'll never die in Old School. Like, these are things that just don't really work with Old School's narrative direction.
So, as someone that hasn't played the quest in RuneScape 3, what? The gods coming back? I thought that was interesting. I don't know I'm sure this has been mentioned before, but there you have it. The gods will not be returning to Old School. I didn't know that. I didn't know that they ever came back in RuneScape 3, but I guess that is important to know. Mod Blossom then asked Ed about storylines and how they'll come up with endings for them, or when they come up with endings for them, to which he brings up a concept I hadn't really thought about.
It depends. So for all the storylines in game, we sort of have like loose definitions behind the scenes of them being either concluded, active, or dormant.
So he takes a while to explain here that obviously the concluded quests are concluded. The active ones are ones that they have been creating stories for in Old School RuneScape. And then the dormant quest lines are ones that are from way back when, but haven't been touched. As soon as he said this, I'm sure you guys thought of it too. Cold War, man. We need the sequel. That's one of the best quests in the game. I think we all agree. That is a classic that we want to see more of.
Generally, for the dormant ones, we just haven't dug too deeply into those. There's obviously some we have some ideas for, but we've not sort of spent too much time going too deeply into those until the time comes to actually probably start working on them. I say as for those storylines that are in progress, like the Marjarat one is obviously getting quite close to its conclusion now, having had 2 Grandmaster quests, starting to get a pretty good idea of what that ending will look like. Mayaki only has 1 quest left. I know pretty damn well like quite most of the details of that one now, of how that will end. Then there's others that are sort of like less defined.
That's a revelation there too. There's one quest left in the Myarchy storyline. That sounds about right with where we're at. It's a long storyline, so I'm down to wrap that up. I'm excited for that. But then, by the grace of God, this question comes by.
Who cares about gods when we've got penguins? And we did have a question in Ask Your Questions channel asking if will we see any more penguin quests, and will we ever meet the Emperor Penguin? I think people need to know more about the penguins.
So I guess the easy answer to like will we is yes, absolutely. Like every storyline in game, even the ones that come out less popular maps in the annual service, are sort of going back to what we mentioned earlier, which yes, unfortunately does include Elemental Workshop. That's not as well liked as some others. Like the very much hope is that one day all of those storylines will be concluded. We don't want to leave any of them like left open ended, but you know, the joys of priorities and only having so many hours in the day, we can't do them all at once. And Penguins is one that is currently dormant. But we are still very keen to continue it.
There you have it. Penguins coming back at some point. If I didn't get anything else out of this whole Q&A, I was just happy to hear that. So, and of course, Mod Errol makes a great point here in regards to sailing.
We are still thinking about penguins, just like you guys.
Definitely with sailing coming up, I think we have a really good opportunity there to kind of dive more into the penguin storyline.
Throughout the whole session, Mod Blossom struggled with pronouncing a lot of the words that are in the lore. Might have been something you wanted to practice before. But alas, that gave us this moment where she asked about the pronunciation of Verzik Vitur.
With Verzik Vitur, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
So I was actually happy to hear this because I'm currently working on a Verzik Vitur lore video that should be out later this week. And I'm not going to lie, I might have questioned how to pronounce it myself, so that was personally very helpful for me. I would really like a whole series where they go into the pronunciation of a lot of these hard words. Like, we will never settle the Ardoon debate. Yeah, Ardoon. But nonetheless, I also didn't include a clip of it, but he does also say here that the upcoming Araxor boss will not have much new lore connected with it. He says, I want to shoot you guys straight. I don't want to, get you excited. The lore for the Araxite is shallow, and it's already established in the game. You learn about them during a night at the theater, I think. So that is also great news for me because I was considering waiting on my Verzik video to see if any new lore came out with that update. So I appreciate that because it means I can actually upload my video this week. Thanks, Mod Ed.
Is there any plans for Brassica Prime to be more than just a side joke? If it's a real deity within the game, such that high-level mages can draw power from it, then wouldn't it be fun to have some quests about that?
I think the fun part is that it's a bit of a joke character. I hope that doesn't diminish the almighty power of Brassica Prime, but obviously RuneScape is a game with a fair amount of humorous other stories, and I wouldn't want to make Brassica Prime too serious of a character. Also, especially given what we said earlier, the gods are never going to return old school, unfortunately, even cabbage-based ones. So he's never going to play too big a role in old school storytelling anyway. I think it's okay for him to be a bit more of a fun one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. That is a valuable point there. Is some stuff you can't over-explain it. You can't put too much lore into the game. Is that true? Can you not put too much? Yeah, I think that's true. Then returning to the backporting talk, Mod Ed was just going on more about some changes that they've made to quests.
But it's a delicate balance that we shouldn't go editing all quests for no reason. We definitely shouldn't be retconning things. That's something I'm very much against. The only time we should be doing things like that, and we have done it before. We did it for Rune Mysteries, and we did it for Igthrin's Little Helper 2 quests. We did it for where unfortunately the back then, I don't want to criticize too much. It's not necessarily a fault of any one individual, but mistakes get made, and back then they didn't have sort of like a central like narrative resource to make sure everything was staying consistent. So from time to time, you did unfortunately have quests that were released, and the story didn't match up with the wider game lore. In situations like that, we have made corrections. So we did it to Rune Mysteries, we did it to Ixthrinzel Help, because there were things in those quests that they.
I want to mention that Mod Ed keeps doing this thing where he's running on his sentences, and as he runs on, they get lower until they finally sound like this, and it sounds like he needs a sip of water. So I really just hope my boy gets a glass of water next time he's, like just take a breath, brother.
There were things in those quests that they were not marring up with the wider game story and things told in other quests. So it's weird because it's not really a retcon because you've got two conflicting pieces of information. Which one is correct? Even then, wherever possible, we try to make it that, this guy just assumes this and this guy assumes that. They have different interpretations. Always a big fan of stuff like that. Always tries to do lots of that. I think that's very fitting for old school.
Great answer, Mod Ed. This next question was a great question.
It's a new book series, Gift of Gothics, Fall of Hallavale, and the upcoming comic book series, Untold Tales of the God Wars. Are they canon to the lore of old school?
Oh, so I guess the simple answer is no, but also kind of, which is, I realize, a very confusing answer. So
yeah, I was curious about this because I've been thinking about getting those books and reading them and making a video, to explain them to you guys. So I was curious what Mod Ed was going to say about this.
Kind of have to embrace the inconsistency at a certain point, especially with these being a game agnostic. Like this isn't a book series. The ones are the novels that are currently coming out. This isn't a series for old school players. It's not a series for RuneScape players. It's for both. Like it's meant to be about the RuneScape universe rather than any one specific game. And because the games are already super inconsistent, if you made the book consistent with one, it was going to be inconsistent with the other. So instead, they're kind of just their own thing, I guess. I guess it's the same example of what you see quite a lot in a lot of entertainment. Like you've got the Harry Potter books, you've got the Harry Potter films. They're kind of telling the same story, but they're clearly not in the same universe. Like there's changes that are made. Whether or not you agree with those changes is something obviously we could debate all day long. But there's differences that mean that they are not set in the same universe. So it's kind of the same here, I guess, that they're respectful of the old school lore. They're trying to be respectful of the lore of like both games and sort of like match it up where possible. But because of those differences, they're never going to be able to fully do that. So they kind of instead sit in their own universe. But just in the same way that we've referenced things from RuneScape and they have from us, there are things in the books that we may borrow from at some point. It's always fun.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I probably will still buy some of those books and start reading them. You guys let me know if that's something you want to see. Next up, we got a almost direct answer about what's coming in the Dorgeshan storyline.
Yes, I guess I kind of answered this question ago. I said our goal is to finish all storylines. Yes, that includes the Dorgeshan one. That is one of the ones, though, that we surveyed about potentially backporting Chosen Commander, and post-survey, it was one of the ones where we decided, Chosen Commander was a very, very strong contender for being backported. Obviously, we haven't started work on any of that yet, so that's still not set in stone, but that may well be sort of like the way it goes, that we do a backport of Chosen Commander to conclude that quest.
It's a quest.
Okay, this one has had a lot of upvotes. So I'm going to ask it. What is Sol Heredit? Sorry if that's not how you pronounce it.
This is actually a really good example of what I was just on about. We had quite a few ideas internally for what he could be, and we ultimately decided to intentionally not put any of them in game, to leave it open and leave people wondering, like, what is this mysterious like boss at the end of a Colosseum? Because we were having lots of conversation at the time. I think specifically around the fact that maybe sometimes we've leaned a bit too far into trying to explain everything, and as Errol said, maybe getting a bit too scientific, of like everything must have an outright explanation. It does take away the fantasy a bit, does take away the fun. So while we had lots of cool ideas for what he could be, the one we ultimately went with was let's not actually say, and let's leave it open to what people think.
Again, that's cool, leave it open, but I do hope with Soul Heritage we get a more definitive answer at some point during the Varlamore quest line. I like that they left it open for now, though.
What is the law behind the Void Knights? What threats do they protect Galenor from?
The Void, of course. They were fleshed out a bit more in RuneScape. They got their own little quest series. I'd be quite keen to give them an old school quest series at some point. Though with how many quest storylines we already have ongoing, I'm not in too big a rush to start opening too many new ones. But maybe one day we've closed a few more. I'd love to explore them a bit more. But yeah, basically, just as the name suggests, they are there to protect Galenor from creatures from the Void.
Yep, agree again. That would be cool one day in the future to get some Void Knight quest line. I do remember, that's one I do remember doing in RS3. I think that's where the Karasi came from. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we have the Void Waker now. I don't think there's any rush to get something like that in the game. So that was most of the good stuff I pulled out of the whole hour-long Q&A. There is one last thing that Mod Ed wanted to throw in.
I'll tell you what, I'll finish on a little tease, because I know people like that, and I've seen something come up in the chat a few times about the backporting stuff and the Marjrat stuff. So I just want to make it clear that we are not backporting Ritual of the Marjrat. We have our own finale planned. We're not quite there yet. We have I think 2 more quests to go before we get to it. One of those is planned to be a backport. One of those is an original quest, but that's drawing on some similar elements to a quest that was done in RuneScape, but like a new twist on it, new take on it, which is quite fun. And then we have our big finale. It's not Ritual of the Marjrat. It's not a backport of it. It's our own thing. It's not called Ritual of the Marjrat. I know what the title is. I'm not going to tell you what the title is. I'm going to tell you it does have the word Marjrat in it. It doesn't have the word Ritual in it. I want someone to try and guess what it is. There you go. There's a little tease for you.
So that's cool. No Ritual of the Marjrat, but we are going to get something like it. I don't know what you guys think the name of that title is going to be. Leave a comment what you think it might be. I have a guess. I'm going to leave it in the comments down below. I'm pretty sure my guess is right. Feels correct. That was pretty much it. There is one last question that Mod Blossom ended it on, and I'm going to let her take it away.
Awesome. I'm going to finish this off on one last kind of light question. There are a lot of cats getting attention in the game. Any plans on making something about dogs? Since this person believes they are superior to cats, I'm not going to express my opinion on the matter. But
well, Mod Blossom didn't want to express her opinion on that matter, but don't worry, Mod Blossom, because I will do it for you.